I feel like I should have finished the Riftwar Trilogy ages ago, but now that I finally have, it's time to do a series review. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video we are going to be talking about the Riftwar Trilogy, the original, which I'm still referring to as a trilogy because it's Magician, Silverthorn, and A Darkness at Sethanon, which I realize we're in the wrong order. There we go, all fixed. Magician is split into Apprentice and Master in other formats, but originally is one novel, and I have this really cool version of it as well. And I wanted to talk about this because it did take me a while to get to this, but I have some mixed thoughts as a trilogy, although I did enjoy all of the books, and so let's jump in. So first let's talk about Magician, because Magician does not feel like the first book in the trilogy. Magician feels almost like its own trilogy, or at least duology, which, you know, the split kind of makes sense, but it really does tell a complete story, is the thing. We're following Pug as our main character in Magician, as, you know, he is the magician, and we follow him and go through, and there's a lot of time that passes over the course of the first book, and we are looking at a whole plot, which includes the Rift War. It's, you know, people coming from another world and the battles. There's a huge amount of plot, characters, and things happening. And when you finish Magician, and I think probably one of the reasons why it took me so long to continue is because I loved Magician. It is absolutely somewhere on my list of favorite books. It was very high, if it didn't win, I don't remember, on my top books of the year when I read it, and it is a phenomenal book, but it really doesn't feel, once again, like this is book one of a trilogy. I don't know if when it was originally published, he was just publishing the book, or if it was always going to be a trilogy, but because of that, I feel like that's where, looking at this as a trilogy, I don't know how I feel about it as a trilogy, but Magician, I think, is the strongest by far of the books, and so that's kind of where it can be a little bit mixed with going into it. However, Silverthorn, the next book, when talking about this shifts focus a lot. This is mostly following Arutha as well as Jimmy the Hand, and we focus a lot on Jimmy in the next two books as well as Arutha, and so we get it's a very, very different feel, and it took me a little bit to get into it, but Silverthorn is at its heart a quest fantasy, and I really enjoy quest fantasy, so I really had a great time with it. And it's still dealing with some of the fallout from the first book, some of the things that were, you know, there in the first book. Like, this does follow up. It's not like this is many years later or anything. It is following up, you know, and really going in, and these two books happen over a much shorter period of time as well, whereas Magician was like the epic. These do follow fairly close together, and so I still had a great time with Silverthorn. Darkness at Sethanon is another one where at first I had trouble getting into this, and my biggest complaint is it feels too much like Silverthorn for a while. Now, things do change, but we have a lot of the same beats, especially the early part of this book. We have really similar things happening in the same city, with the same enemies, with the same people, and then they have to, you know, people are leaving to go on a quest. Like, there's a lot of really, really similar feeling things that happen, although we do build up to a much bigger thing. We get to see Pug a little bit more in this book as well, which is nice, and so we are branching out. We're doing a little bit more. We are coming back to things that were relevant and going with the really big picture. So I get it, but it had kind of a slow start as well for me. And so I did really still enjoy this book, and individually I enjoyed all of the books. But what I think is interesting is, like I said, is this really a trilogy? Or, you know, 4 books if you want to say it. Because we are building up to something that is big and relevant, but to me, Silverthorn and A Darkness at Sethanon feel more like, I guess, like almost like a just different series. Like I said, Magician I feel like stands alone really, really well. Silverthorn, which, I mean, kind of does. It's setting up some stuff, but it works on its own as a book. And Darkness at Sethanon as well is more of a direct follow-up to Silverthorn. So these do feel like they're building toward the same thing. And it is a ton of elements from Magician as well. But that's what I think is interesting here, is it doesn't necessarily feel like a cohesive trilogy because the first book is just so big and does so much. And that's what I find to be interesting here. Now, I know there's a ton more Riftwar, and so I'll be interested to see once I start continuing. I do have the Empire Trilogy, which I plan on reading as well, which I think is the next and kind of happens, I think, somewhat simultaneously to this trilogy. And then also, there's, just a ton of Riftwar books. I have some Legends of the Riftwar books, which are co-authored by other authors as well, which I think take place during the original trilogy. And then there's just a ton, and I have some miscellaneous ones from Feist as well, with a lot more Riftwar. So I'll definitely be continuing, and I wonder if my thoughts will change. But overall, I do think this is a really solid series. I do think, though, if you read Magician, and loved it, I think you could be satisfied with that if you're not planning on reading all of Riftwar. At the same time, though, I think Silverthorn and Darkness Sethanon are also really good books. Silverthorn was still like a 5 stars for me. It might have been with a little bit of rounding, and I think Darkness Sethanon was either a 4 or a 5. So still like highly rated, even though I feel like Darkness Sethanon was definitely my least favorite book. It did build up to some great things once you got far enough in. But for me, it was kind of a, and I say a sliding scale, but it's not like it was bad. It was still a really good book, but it started being a little too derivative of Silverthorn. And then it did some really big things that were cool and interesting, but some of it just felt like it was really, I don't want to say necessarily coming out of nowhere, but there were just some things that felt a little bit too fixed in there, where it's like, this is what's happening now, and so... Well, it still gave a satisfying ending, did some cool stuff, set up some ideas, I'm sure, for the future. I just felt like it was, for me, the weakest book, although still really good. And Silverthorn, like I said, if you're not a huge fan of quest tropes and quest fantasy, you may not like Silverthorn as much as I did, because that was one of the reasons why I really liked it, even though it took me a bit to get in. I ended up really loving the book once I, got further in, and then after finishing it, loved it as well. But yeah, Magician is still, for me, the big one. It was just such a good book. It does stand on its own really well. It has a very much beginning, middle, and end, and could absolutely be considered a standalone book. And so that's kind of where I fell. Now, I'm really curious to hear what other people's thoughts are on this as well, because I do feel like I've heard people say like the other ones aren't as good. So I kind of expected that a bit, but I was more surprised by the fact that it just really didn't feel like a trilogy to me. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you just called it a series, I feel like that, it'd be the same thing. But the, trilogy kind of 3-act thing, I think because Magician did so much, that's why it felt a little bit differently. So let me know your thoughts on this, but those are kind of my thoughts on the books and the first Riftwar bit. Like I said, this is a series that I really enjoyed. I love a lot of the characters and the magic that's set up in the world, and just did a really fantastic job in Magician. And it's almost like he did such a good job that it was hard to follow it with these other novels, because it was following that first one was just a little bit difficult. So those are kind of my general thoughts. It's hard to get into more details without getting into spoilers, and I just wanted to do this a general spoiler-free kind of review of the series overall and how I felt about it in each book. So that's kind of what we have here. But that's it for this one. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Wizard of the Enclave Discord if you want to talk books, whether these books, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.